South Africa stands at a critical crossroads in its fight against corruption, a battle that has defined much of the country's political and economic journey over the past decade. At the center of that fight is President Cyril Ramaphosa, a leader who has repeatedly pledged to root out corruption, rebuild state institutions, and restore public trust. But as progress is made, the challenges ahead remain just as significant. And for many South Africans, the question is no longer whether corruption is being addressed, but whether the pace and impact are enough. Over the past few years, Ramaphosa's approach to tackling corruption has been markedly different from previous administrations. Rather than relying on political purges, his strategy has focused on strengthening institutions, empowering independent investigations, judicial commissions, and law enforcement agencies to act within the framework of the Constitution. This approach has led to what many analysts describe as one of the most extensive anti-corruption efforts in democratic South Africa's history. Here's what that means in real terms. Since the era of state capture, a period widely associated with widespread corruption and institutional breakdown, the government has taken steps to recover lost funds and rebuild oversight mechanisms. By late 2025, authorities had recovered more than 16.4 billion rand linked to corruption and state capture cases through agencies like the Special Investigating Unit and the Asset Forfeiture Unit. That is a significant figure, but it also highlights the scale of the problem, with estimates suggesting the total damage from corruption may have reached as high as 1.5 trillion rand. Despite these recovery efforts, the issue of accountability remains a major concern. Many South Africans have pointed out that while investigations have increased, high-profile convictions remain limited. Experts warn that without visible consequences for those implicated, public confidence in the system could continue to erode. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges facing Ramaphosa's anti-corruption drive: trust. In his own words, the president has acknowledged that corruption has squandered trust in democracy and governance, creating a deep credibility gap between the state and its citizens. Rebuilding that trust is not just a political goal, it is essential for economic growth, investment, and social stability. At the same time, corruption is no longer seen as a problem confined to government alone. Ramaphosa has repeatedly emphasized that corruption in South Africa is multidimensional, involving both public officials and private sector actors. This broader understanding has shaped a more comprehensive response, targeting financial crime, procurement fraud, and organized criminal networks operating across sectors. But perhaps the most urgent test of the government's anti-corruption efforts lies within the country's law enforcement system itself. Recent findings from the Madlanga Commission have exposed what the president described as rampant corruption in parts of the police and metro police services. These revelations have been deeply concerning, suggesting that the very institutions responsible for enforcing the law may themselves be compromised. In response, Ramaphosa has committed to sweeping reforms, including an integrated plan to overhaul policing, strengthen intelligence-led operations, and improve accountability across the criminal justice system. He has also pledged to fully implement the recommendations of anti-corruption inquiries, aiming to restore integrity and effectiveness within law enforcement agencies. However, experts warn that reforming institutions is a slow and complex process. Years of mismanagement, political interference, and systemic corruption cannot be undone overnight. As one analyst put it, rebuilding a capable and ethical state requires not just policy changes, but a fundamental shift in governance culture. Here's what that means for ordinary South Africans. Corruption is not just a political issue. It impacts daily life. It impacts service delivery, job creation, infrastructure development, and public safety. When funds are misused or stolen, communities feel the consequences through failing municipalities, unreliable services, and limited economic opportunities. That is why the fight against corruption is closely linked to broader economic goals. In his State of the Nation address and subsequent policy statements, Ramaphosa has emphasized the need to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state, one that can deliver services efficiently and support inclusive growth. But achieving that vision requires more than policy commitments. It requires consistent enforcement, political will, and public accountability. At the same time, South Africa is navigating multiple overlapping challenges, from high unemployment and inequality to crime and infrastructure constraints. These pressures make the fight against corruption even more urgent. As Ramaphosa himself has acknowledged, the country is far from where it needs to be, with many citizens still struggling to access basic services. Political dynamics also play a key role. With local government elections approaching, anti-corruption efforts are increasingly seen as a test of credibility for the ruling party and the broader government. Voters are likely to judge not just promises, but tangible results, including prosecutions, institutional reforms, and improvements in governance. Meanwhile, there are signs of progress. Government initiatives targeting financial crime, illegal mining, and organized syndicates have led to increased arrests and asset recoveries. Partnerships with the private sector are also being strengthened to improve transparency and economic oversight, and new legal frameworks, including strengthened anti-money laundering measures and investigative bodies, are beginning to take effect. But challenges remain deeply entrenched. Corruption networks are often sophisticated, well-resourced, and embedded within institutions. Investigations can take years, and legal processes are often complex. And, perhaps most importantly, political pressures can influence how quickly and effectively reforms are implemented. Experts warn that the next phase of South Africa's anti-corruption journey will be the most critical. It will determine whether the country can move from investigation to accountability, from exposure to real consequences. So, what should South Africans expect next? In the coming months, attention will likely focus on several key areas: the implementation of recommendations from major commissions, progress in high-profile prosecutions, reforms within law enforcement and intelligence structures, and the government's ability to translate policy into measurable results. In the end, the fight against corruption is more than just governance. It is about the future of South Africa's democracy. It is about whether institutions can be trusted, whether public resources are used effectively, and whether citizens feel that justice is being served. And as President Cyril Ramaphosa continues to navigate this complex landscape, one thing is clear: progress has been made, but the real test still lies ahead.